Macau, also spelled Macau, officially known as the Macau Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China, is an autonomous territory on the southern coast of the People's Republic of China. Macau lies on the western side of the Pearl River Delta across from Hong Kong, which is about 64 kilometers to the east, and it is also bordered by Guangdong of mainland China to the north and the South China Sea to the east and south. With an estimated population of around 636,200 living in an area of 30.3 square kilometers, it is the most densely populated region in the world. As Portuguese Macau, it was administered by the Portuguese Empire and its inheritor states from the mid-16th century until late 1999. When it was the last remaining European colony in Asia under Portugal. Portuguese traders first settled in Macau in the 1550s. In 1557, Macau was rented to Portugal from Ming China as a trading port. The Portuguese Empire administered the city under Chinese authority and sovereignty until 1887, when Macau became a colony. Sovereignty over Macau was transferred to China on 20 December 1999. The Joint Declaration on the Question of Macau and Macau Basic Law stipulate that Macau operate with a high degree of autonomy until at least 2049. 50 years after the transfer, under the policy of one country, two systems. The State Council of the People's Republic of China is responsible for military defense and foreign affairs, while Macau maintains its own legal system. The public security force, monetary system, customs policy, and immigration policy. Macau participates in many international organizations and events that do not require members to possess national sovereignty. Macau is one of the world's richest cities, and as of 2013 its GDP per capita by purchasing power parity is higher than that of any country in the world, according to the World Bank. It became the world's largest gambling center in 2006, with the economy heavily dependent on gambling and tourism, as well as manufacturing. Cantonese people from Hong Kong and Guangdong, in addition to the recent mainland tourism from Mandarin-speaking regions, have boosted the economy of Macau significantly. According to the World Factbook, Macau has the fourth highest life expectancy in the world. Moreover, it is one of only a few regions in Asia with the Very High Human Development Index, ranking 14th as of 2013. Etymology. Before the Portuguese settlement in the mid-16th century, Macau was known as Haojing or Jinghai. The name Macau is thought to be derived from the Amar Temple, a temple built in 1448, dedicated to Mazu, the goddess of seafarers and fishermen. It is said that when the Portuguese sailors landed at the coast just outside the temple and asked the name of the place, the natives replied. The Portuguese then named the peninsula Macau. The present Chinese name means inlet gates. History. The history of Macau is traced back to the Qin dynasty, when the region now called Macau came under the jurisdiction of Pani County, Nanhai Prefecture. The first recorded Chinese inhabitants of the area were people seeking refuge in Macau from invading Mongols during the Southern Song. Under the Ming dynasty, fishermen migrated to Macau from Guangdong and Fujian. Macau did not develop as a major settlement until the Portuguese arrived in the 16th century. In 1513, George Alvarez became the first Portuguese to land in China. In 1535, Portuguese traders obtained the rights to anchor ships in Macau's harbors and to carry out trading activities, though not the right to stay on shore. Around 1552 to 1553, they obtained temporary permission to erect storage sheds on shore. In order to dry out goods drenched by sea water, they soon built rudimentary stone houses around the area now called Nulm Van. In 1557, the Portuguese established a permanent settlement in Macau, paying an annual rent of 500 taels of silver. The Portuguese continued to pay an annual tribute up to 1863 in order to stay in Macau. By 1564, Portugal commanded Western trade with India, Japan, and China, but their pride was shocked by the indifference with which the Chinese treated them. The Senate of Macau once complained to the Viceroy of Goa of the contempt with which the Chinese authorities treated them, confessing however that it was owing more to the Portuguese themselves than to the Chinese. In 1631 the Chinese restricted Portuguese commerce in China to the port of Macau. During the 17th century, some 5,000 slaves lived in Macau, in addition to 2,000 Portuguese and 20,000 Chinese. As more Portuguese settled in Macau to engage in trade, they made demands for self-administration, but this was not achieved until the 1840s. In 1576, Pope Gregory XIII established the Roman Catholic Diocese of Macau. In 1583, the Portuguese in Macau were permitted to form a senate to handle various issues concerning their social and economic affairs under strict supervision of the Chinese authority. But there was no transfer of sovereignty. Macau prospered as a port, but it was the target of repeated failed attempts by the Dutch to conquer it in the 17th century. On June 24, 1622, the Dutch attacked Macau in the Battle of Macau, in the hope of turning it into a Dutch possession. The Portuguese repulsed their attack and the Dutch never tried to conquer Macau again. The majority of the defenders were African slaves, with only a few Portuguese soldiers and priests. Captain Cornelis Reiszoon was commander of the 800-strong Dutch invasion force. The Dutch governor Jan Cohen said after the defeat that the slaves of the Portuguese at Macau served him so well and faithfully, that it was they who defeated and drove away our people there last year, and our people saw very few Portuguese during the battle. Following the First Opium War, Portugal occupied Taipa and Cologne in 1851 and 1864 respectively. On 1 December 1887, the King and Portuguese governments signed the Sino-Portuguese Treaty of Peking, under which China ceded the right of perpetual occupation and government of Macau by Portugal, in compliance with the statements of the Protocol of Lisbon. In return, Macau government would cooperate with Hong Kong's smuggle of Indian opium and China would be able to increase profits through customs taxes. Portugal was also obliged never to alienate Macau without previous agreement with China, therefore ensuring that negotiation between Portugal and France or with other countries would not go forward, so that the British commercial interests would be secured. Macau officially became a territory under Portuguese administration. In 1928, after the Qing dynasty had been overthrown following the Xinhai Revolution, the Kuomintang government officially notified Portugal that it was abrogating the Treaty of Amity and Commerce. The two powers signed a new Sino-Portuguese Friendship and Trade Treaty in place of the abrogated treaty, making only a few provisions concerning tariff principles and matters relating to business affairs. The new treaty did not alter the sovereignty of Macau and Portuguese government of Macau remained unchanged. During World War II, unlike Portuguese Timor, which was occupied by the Japanese in 1942 along with Dutch Timor, the Japanese respected Portuguese neutrality in Macau, but only up to a point. As such, Macau enjoyed a brief period of economic prosperity as the only neutral port in South China after the Japanese had occupied Guangzhou and Hong Kong. In August 1943, Japanese troops seized the British steamer Shan in Macau and killed about 20 guards. The next month they demanded the installation of Japanese advisors under the alternative of military occupation. The result was that a virtual Japanese protectorate was created over Macau. When it was discovered that neutral Macau was planning to sell aviation fuel to Japan, aircraft from the US Enterprise bombed and strafed the hangar of the Naval Aviation Center on 16 January 1945 to destroy the fuel. American air raids on targets in Macau were also made on 25 February and 11 June 1945. Following Portuguese government protest, in 1950 the United States paid $20,255,952 to the government of Portugal. Between the end of the Pacific War and the establishment of the People's Republic of China, Macau served as a safe haven for refugees of the Chinese Civil War. After the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the Beijing government declared the Sino-Portuguese Treaty invalid as an unequal treaty imposed by foreigners on China. However, Beijing was not ready to settle the treaty question, leaving the maintenance of the status quo until a more appropriate time. Influenced by the Cultural Revolution in mainland China and by general dissatisfaction with Portuguese government, riots broke out in Macau in 1966. In the most serious, the so-called 12-3 incident, 6 people were killed and more than 200 people were injured. On 28 January 1967, the Portuguese government issued a formal apology by means of an admission of guilt. Shortly after Portugal's 1974 Carnation Revolution, which overthrew the Estado Novo dictatorship, the new government determined it would relinquish all its overseas possessions. In 1976, Lisbon redefined Macau as of Chinese territory under Portuguese administration, and granted it a large measure of administrative, financial, and economic autonomy. 3 years later, Portugal and China agreed to regard Macau as a Chinese territory under Portuguese administration. The Chinese and Portuguese governments commenced negotiations on the question of Macau in June 1986. The two signed a Sino-Portuguese joint declaration the next year, making Macau a special administrative region of China. The Chinese government assumed formal sovereignty over Macau on 20 December 1999. The economy since then has continued to prosper with the sustained growth of tourism from mainland China and the construction of new casinos. Government and politics. The Sino-Portuguese Joint Declaration and Macau Basic Law, Macau's constitution, promulgated by China's National People's Congress in 1993, specify that Macau's social and economic system, lifestyle, rights, and freedoms are to remain unchanged for at least 50 years after the transfer of sovereignty to China in 1999. Under the principle of one country, two systems, Macau enjoys a high degree of autonomy in all areas except defense and foreign affairs. Macau officials, rather than PRC officials, run Macau through the exercise of separate executive, legislative, and judicial powers, as well as the right to final adjudication. Macau maintains its own currency, customs territory, immigration and border controls and police force. Executive. The government in Macau is headed by the Chief Executive of Macau, who is appointed by the central government upon the recommendation of an election committee, whose 300 members are nominated by corporate and community bodies. The recommendation is made by an election within the committee. The chief executive's cabinet is made up of 5 policy secretaries and is advised by the Executive Council of Macau, which has between 7 and 11 members. Edmund Ho, a community leader and former banker, was the first chief executive of the Macau SAR, replacing General Vasco Rocha Vieira at midnight on 20 December 1999. Fernando Chui is the current chief executive. The chief executive and the cabinet have their offices in the Macau government headquarters, located in the area of Saúl, or Renzo. Legislature. The legislative organ of the territory is the Legislative Assembly, a 33-member body comprising 14 directly elected members. 12 indirectly elected members representing functional constituencies and 7 members appointed by the chief executive. Any permanent residents at or over 18 years of age are eligible to vote in direct elections. Indirect election is limited to organizations registered as corporate voters, and a 300-member election committee drawn from broad regional groupings, municipal organizations, and central government bodies. Judiciary. The original framework of the legal system, based largely on the law of Portugal, the Portuguese civil law system, was preserved after 1999. The territory has its own independent judicial system with a high court. Judges are selected by a committee and appointed by the chief executive. Foreign judges may serve on the courts. Macau has a three-tier court system: the Court of the First Instance, the Court of the Second Instance, and the Court of Final Appeal. In February 2009, the Legislative Assembly passed the Macau National Security Law based on a withdrawn security legislation previously introduced in Hong Kong. Democracy advocates feared that the bill's excessively broad scope could lead to abuses, a concern which has been heightened after a number of prominent supporters of democracy in Hong Kong were denied entry into Macau in the run-up to the bill's passage. Military. Under Portuguese rule, Macau often served as an expeditionary base to Japan and other regions of East Asia from the 16th century onwards, while maintaining a strong garrison mainly to repel Dutch and mainland Chinese attacks. However, since the Allied British settled Hong Kong, the need for a strong military presence in Macau dimmed and it became limited before ceasing in 1974. However, despite having no Portuguese garrison left on the territory, a small security force managed by the local PSP was kept, which proved useful with the escalating triad warfare tensions towards the last decades of Portuguese administration. Also, the Capitania dos Portos kept operating a coast guard and the Portuguese Air Force kept airfields active until the opening of Macau International Airport in the mid-1990s. In 1999, upon handover to the PRC, a substantial garrison of the People's Liberation Army was established in the city, helping deliver the last blow to the violence perpetrated by the triads, who were weakened by police action and arrests prior to the handover. The garrison remains, with a large portion of the forces stationed in neighboring Zhuhai as well. Headquarters of the Government of Macau, previously the Governor's House until 1999. Office building of the Legislative Assembly of Macau. Geography. Macau skyline. Macau is situated 60 kilometers southwest of Hong Kong and 145 kilometers from Guangzhou of mainland China. It also has 41 kilometers of coastline, yet only 310 meters of land border with Guangdong of mainland China. It consists of the Macau Peninsula itself and the islands of Taipa and Cologne, which are now connected by landfill forming Cotai. The peninsula is formed by the Zhujiang estuary on the east and the Shijiang on the west. It borders the Zhuhai Special Economic Zone in mainland China. The main border crossing between Macau and China is known as the Portus du Surco on the Macau side, and the Gongbei Port of Entry on the Zhuhai side. Macau Peninsula was originally an island, but a connecting sandbar gradually turned into a narrow isthmus, thus changing Macau into a peninsula. Land reclamation in the 17th century transformed Macau into a peninsula with generally flat terrain, though numerous steep hills still mark the original land mass. Alto de Cologne is the highest point in Macau, with an altitude of 170.6 meters. With a dense urban environment, Macau has no arable land, pastures, forest, or woodland. The map of Macau, showing Macau Peninsula, Cotai, Taipa and Cologne. Macau Peninsula. Landscape of Pena Hill in Macau. Macau, in 2013. Museum of Macau. Cologne Village with the artistic Portuguese pavement. Macau seen from Lake Nam Van. View of the old city in Macau with tenement housing in the foreground. Climate. Macau has a humid subtropical climate, with average relative humidity between 75% and 90%. Similar to much of South China, seasonal climate is greatly influenced by the monsoons, and differences in temperature and humidity between summer and winter are noticeable, though not as great as mainland China. The average annual temperature of Macau is 22.7 degrees Celsius, July is the warmest month, with the average temperature being 28.9 degrees Celsius. The coolest month is January, with a mean temperature of 14.5 degrees Celsius. Located on China's southern coast, Macau has ample rainfall, with average annual precipitation being 2,120 millimeters. However, winter is mostly dry due to the influence of the vast Siberian high affecting much of East Asia. Autumn in Macau, from October to November, is sunny and still pleasantly warm with lower humidity. Winter is generally mild with temperatures above 13 degrees Celsius most of the time, although it can drop below 8 degrees Celsius at times. Humidity starts to increase from late March. Summer is very warm to hot during the day. The hot weather is often followed by heavy rain, thunderstorms and occasional typhoons.